Gentlemen, thank you. Back to the shop. Beer clock. We'll have a little safety brew. What for perspicacity? Set. Have a stew in front of the fire. The previous video, I appreciate you coming around and sharing your stories with me about old Granda and toasting roasties and well, that IR. Tell you what, makes you blink awful hard. I ain't crying, you're crying. Yeah, the last one, I really appreciate you joining me here in our little community, having a laugh and a tickle. I reached down, lo and behold, a single tear. Like stigmata, blood. Like that Jesus fella. I often wondered what made him so popular with the ladies. So I asked, you fellas like that kind of, not really a man's man, but that blue-eyed, arid Arab hippie routine? I don't know, it's not that at all. Tall, dark, and manky? No. It's because that Jesus fella, he was hung like this. But too soon? Too soon. Speaking of men who changed the world, not to worry, this is not going to be a religiosity display. I've had my full of religious dogma from the Roman Catholic Church. I kind of got wind that there was something amiss when the former pope there, the Luciferian, suggested that tulips on his organ was better than flowers on your own piano. But I digress. We're going to talk about Claude Shannon. Claude Elwood Shannon as it pertains to the misery instilled in us by trolls on Tinternet and how I managed to defeat all trolls once and for all. Allow for me first to play for you the song of my people. Claude Shannon, slight man, 135 pounds, soaking, wringing wet, maybe 5'6", but an unholy terror of an intellect. Born in Gaylord, Michigan, home to all 3,000 Gaylordians, to a father who was a probate judge, kind of commercial judge, and a teacher, a language teacher. And that's very important. Well, we might not discuss that today, but we'll get back to her. He was working in the 30s. I think he was born in 1919. I'm not entirely sure. That's the beauty of oral histories, is you don't need to remember all the details. You just remember the framework of the story, and then the magic of the spelling takes you away. It's not for no reason that incanting words is called spelling. He was working on his undergrad, electrical engineered, and he took an elective course. That elective course changed our world and continues to change our world. He took philosophy of all things, for an electrical engineer. Now, he was somewhat of a capricious young lad. He liked to take things apart, get them back together when he could. He ran a barbed wire half a mile to his friend's house so they could run a little telegraph. And of course he worked as well as most children used to back in the day. He had responsibilities. It's one of the things I think might be lacking nowadays is children aren't needed. They're appendages. I make sure one of the things that we do in our family is we make sure that our children are necessary and needed by the family. What a horrible thing it would be to be completely useless, just a burden. So we make the kids fucking work. It teaches them a little responsibility. I don't think it hurts them at all. So he was at the University of Michigan, this Shannon fella, and working on his undergrad. He took a class that would change the world. And that class was an elective for an electrical engineer. It was philosophy. So an introduction to Aristotle and classical logic, rhetoric, and something called Boolean logic. Now George Boole was a right holy terror of an autodidact in his own right, that is self-learned. He was the son of a cobbler in Lincolnshire in England. And his father, I don't know if there's some family trauma there or something, but his father didn't do too well in the cobbling trade. And by the time he was 16, old George had taken over the responsibilities and pulling his weight for the whole family. Now, somewhere beside his father's shop was a bookseller, and that bookseller kind of took him under his wing, George Boole. And luckily so, because he kindled in young George a desire to learn and a fascination with languages. Languages, very important. We'll talk about that maybe the next time. George learned Latin. He learned Greek. He learned French. He learned German. And of course, English from borrowing books from this bookseller. And he had self-taught himself, redundancy, Department of Redundancy, so well that eventually he started his own school, and eventually it progressed into developing mechanics institutes, which is a very Lutheran kind of you improved yourself. It's a very, what do they call that? There's papists and the other ones. Proletariats? Can't recall. Somebody will yell out though. And self-improvement is holy. It's a holy act. So he started these mechanical institutes for the education of working men. And he also, later on, he campaigned for early closing, no doubt seeing the benefit of working men getting off at a regular hour. Early closing just means that stores would have regular hours, and the poor bastards were in warehouses, and the poor bastards working there wouldn't have to work until the boss said, okay, you're tired enough, you can go home. They had regular hours, no doubt that aided in going to the Mechanics Institute and borrowing a book and learning about the greater world. This George Boole, he was very influential, and he became a very influential mathematician. He maintained that questions regarding universal laws are essentially mathematical. So, put it another way, if anything is knowable with any certainty, it has to be mathematical. Makes sense, right? If you want 100% certainty, it's got to be numbers, because otherwise it's not just black and white, but it's all shades of gray. So he developed this mathematical language for taking Aristotle's logic and applying mathematical rules to it. I think he had, was it 16 or 32? I think it's 16 operations to go from truth or false, true or false, which is 0 or 1. That's Boolean logic. Okay, so this Claude Shannon, he was taking an undergrad degree, and one of his electives was philosophy. He learned about Boolean logic. Set that aside in his box of tools, bag of tricks, gack drawer, log jam, what have you, whatever you want to call it. Set that aside. As he was graduating from the University of Michigan, saw a sign on the bulletin board. Now, this is not like a bulletin board service, what you dial into with your modem and download nudie pictures. This was a physical bulletin board, there was a little card on there which said MIT was looking for someone to futz with their confuser. It was a differential analyzer, they called it. But it was essentially relays and motors and gears and cogs and discs and rods and snap and crackle and pop. This suited Shannon perfectly because he loved friggin' and fucking around with electromechanical contrivances. While he's at MIT doing his graduate work, he's also getting paid to work on this differential analyzer, essentially programming it mechanically. You change this lever, you change this ratio of this gear to that gear, and you're essentially plugging in numbers for it to pop out the other side. This device must have been extremely complex, and its output was actually a pen and graph paper. So while working on this machine, old Shannon thinks to himself, wait a second, these relays, they're on or off. They're a 1 or 0. That's a truth or a false. That's Boolean logic. And he wrote a paper as a graduate student that changed the fucking world, saying that we could program computers using Boolean logic. Brilliant. It changed the world. So now you can have a relay what only has 2 states, ORF and ON, and you end up downloading nudie pictures from the internet. It's fucking incredible. Okay, so after his graduate degree, or maybe during, he did a sabbaticum or a séjour or something, a tradesies, MIT to Bell Labs, which was also in Massachusetts. Bell Labs was a huge government-funded telecommunications lab, telephony lab, wherein Claude Shannon, surrounded by the fucking brainiacs of the day, come up with this other brilliant idea, name of information theory. Now, information theory, it's quite convoluted in a way what professors like to make themselves sound smarter than they is. But essentially, it's the idea that if you want to send information, you have to encode it, you have to send it, and you have to de-encode it. And the sending gets injected, while it's being sent, it gets injected with noise. And here is the huge step, the mental leap. The injected noise does not degrade the signal. It only slows it down. That's part of it anyway. There's a lot more to it, but for you, me, and the devil makes 3, us laymen sitting around the fire, that's about the extent of it. And I'll give you an example. Say 20, 30, for a long... Before Christ was a cowboy, we didn't even have dirt, it was still rocks. I went to the gay bar with my buddy. He happened to be a homosexual, but that's neither here nor there. His buddy leans across the table. It's noisy, there's dancing and so forth. Leans across the table. Would you care for a drink? I says, pardon? I said, would you care for a drink? I says, well, if you want to hold my dink, you're going to have to give me a drink. You see, the signal was clear, but it took a long time to get it through. It had to be repeated. So the more noise that is injected into a signal, the longer it takes to get through and decode it. Where does that fit in with internet trolls? What YouTube is fantastic, it's been fantastic for, is creating community. That's the signal, is that we're together. And it doesn't matter, what the community surrounds. Ultimately, at its baseline, it's creating community. Now, if you are a media mogul or the old media is all mogul based, where you have to go to Weinstein in order to get let into he's the St. Peter that lets you into the promised land type deal. This mogul arrangement is regular media, TV, all that. You have to comply. You have to be very compliant, and you have to carry water for the right amount of time, and you have to be from the right family, and you have to be able to send the right message. And that is why when you watch the TV or when you watch media, listen to the radio, look at the news, look at magazines, it's all through a proscenium arch. And that proscenium arch used to be there in olden times so that the people watching the play or the performance knew to suspend their disbelief, so that they knew it was bullshit. Now, we've obfuscated the proscenium arch so that we believe that that window we install in our house, that expensive window that shows us the world, we believe that that's an actual window on the world, and it's not. It's all performance. It's complete fucking bullshit. So, when you get onto YouTube and you form an actual community, it degrades TV's popular media's signal. They don't like that. It's an alternative to what is going on, what they portray is going on in the world. They don't fucking like that. So what they do is in your comments section, because that is essentially where the community is formed. There's lots of people lurking and reading and getting some information from there, and there's lots of people interacting, and that's the beautiful thing about it. However, what they can do is they can inject comments that are either gobbledygook or vile or whatever, and that doesn't reduce the signal of good comments. It doesn't attenuate the signal of good comments. What it forces you to do, it slows you down to the point where you won't read the good comments, and that minimizes your community effect. If you're not interested in reading the comments because it's a toxic wasteland, you're not creating the community, which is the baseline of YouTube. Put another way, we welcome everybody into the shop to have a chortle and a chuckle, a beer, and do some grinding. But somebody goes and takes a shit in the corner and then complains about how bad it stinks. By the time he's gone, he's taken out a whole bunch of people because they realize it stinks in here, I'm out. But it takes a while for the truth to bubble up, was that, no, that fucking guy actually took a shit in the corner of the shop. So here's what you do, is you don't let people take a shit in the shop. That is how you stay healthy on YouTube. So there'll be people, freedom of speech, which is super, super important because we are very likely wrong. However, when you read through the comments, you don't know, it's that proscenium arch. It's all bullshit until it ain't. So you don't know if whoever has written on that is a paid shill or is a bot. And any noise is good noise because it slows down the transfer of information. And that transfer of information at its baseline is we're community. We're discussing things. We're working things out. We feel like a little tribe. Things are going to be okay. It's not as crazy as they make it out to be on the TV. So here's what you got to do is when you read through the comments, if there is one that doesn't make sense, you swing the ban hammer instantly. Read no further. If you start to read it and you can tell it's going a bad direction, don't read it. Ban hammer it. Because what they are doing is trying to destroy the community that we have created ourselves between actual thinking, empathetic people. The beautiful thing about vampires, there is evil in the world. I'm telling you, there is evil in the world. And to neglect the fact that there is evil in the world is to open yourself up to that evil. There is evil in the world, but the beautiful thing about a vampire is if you don't invite him in, he can't hurt you. So we invoke the power of Claude Shannon's information theory, and we filter the noise. And that is how you have a fun and happy community, and you continue to enjoy. I'm talking to you, William Osman, and that is how you, now I'm preaching at you, but I'm telling you, you got to get in there and swing that ban hammer proud and loud. The other thing that you will notice, if you are in tune with your viewership, your community, is that when bad shit is about to go down, the trolls and bots amp up. I was talking to Big Clive about this. We chat amongst ourselves, and there was a huge uptick in trolls and people just coming out of left field just prior to all this nonsense coming in a couple years ago. So we can tell by those metrics that some shit is going to go down because the noise goes up. They're trying to inject noise in order to slow us down, in order to slow down our community. That's all there is to it. Who's they? They, this famous they. Well, there's two very powerful tools. We use a Venn diagram, and one circle is cui bono, so who benefits? Who benefits? I think it's pretty easy to determine who benefits because you can look on the stock market and you can look at stocks and profits and so forth. So you can determine who benefits the most and who benefits the least. And then you can also ask, who are we not allowed to talk about? Who are we not allowed to make fun of? What gets us onto the bad side of the ban hammer? And make no mistake about it, YouTube's a fantastic place, but it is run by the powers that be. The internet runs on a former military network. You think that the guys running the network don't know what the traffic is on the network? Really? Really? It's just this happy, I'm kind of George Carlin-esque in my philosophy at this point. It might be my advanced age, but as he said, it's a big fucking club and we ain't in it. George Carlin, by the way, was a fucking genius. You know, he did that. Well, who was Andrew Dice Clay? He was the biggest comedian, I think, ever. Filled up Madison Square Garden, side by each nights, 36,000 people with dirty limericks. Little boy blue. He needed the money. Oh! George Carlin did that bit in 69 or 70. He did limericks, dirty limericks, but he did it with drugs. Less of a broad appeal. Hey! Oh! I don't even know if you could say that word anymore, but yeah, Andrew Dice Clay stole that bit from George Carlin. And I think before George Carlin died, he had it dialed in pretty good. Yeah, it's unsettling, but seems to be quite prescient. So yeah, I like to stay sane. Really enjoy making movies. More so, I really enjoy the community. Thank you for joining me, keeping me sane. I do this for me. I don't, I enjoy making stuff and putting it out in the world, but that's all about my pain, my vain and petty ego, the little pats I get. And that's another thing, is that once you realize that the monologue in your head, your skills, your abilities, what you do in the world, what you own, the money you make, the people you know, that's all ego. And you are far more, you're so much more than the sum of your parts. That ego isn't you. You're part of the universe, and the universe is part of you. So if you can shed that ego, that idea that what you do and what you wear and what you're talking about is you, once you can shed that, it helps a long way to inure yourself from the slings and arrows of narcissists or trolls. Again, you don't know what's on the other side of that comment. It might just be a computer. It might be some guy in Estonia getting paid to type nasty stuff to just to slow down your signal. In the Western tradition, our iconography is really lacking, and I think it was Homer Simpson said, no, it was that nasty old German fella. What's his name? He was in the Star Wars. It escapes me. He said, we need to build a vocabulary of visual images. I wonder how he likes meme lords now, because that's the vocabulary of images is here. It's come to fruition, but it's all memes. That is our, yeah, it's very telling that is our visual vocabulary. Oh, I'm making my own magic fire. At least I hope I am. I'm trying to. An attempt was made. Let me go and get it. Excuse me. Better to fart and taste it than to burp while you're wasted. This is wood ash in muriatic, so it should be potassium chlorate or something similar. We should get nice red flames from this. Well, and there'll be lots of calcium carbonate as well, or calcium chlorate, but that's just white flame. And close your lungs. So why is language so important? These Jebuses all seem to be able to conjugate a number of them, including mathematics, music. It's all language. As Terence Terence McKenna, Philly hippie, once famously said, reality is made up of words. And that's not some philosophical, druggy mumbo jumbo. If you encounter something that you don't have a word for, it bothers you. You gotta think about it. And there's something I don't get. It just does not compute. And if you're the least bit tuned out, you won't even think about it. It'll just be, it won't even enter into your reality because there's no word for it. But if you're tuned in and you research it and you think about it, it bothers you because you don't have a word for it. There's many things that are abstractions they only exist in your own head. They're only an idea. And if you can't label those abstractions, you can't really think about them. And if you can't think about them, they're not real. They're not part of your reality. Your reality only exists, my reality only exists between mine two ears. So I need to have the language, the vocabulary, in order to think about these concepts, these items, these devices. You can't plan ahead. You can't do that internal monologue unless you have a linguistic label for something. So if you want to live in the biggest world possible, to have the capacity for thinking, you need to have a very strong vocabulary. And if you can learn another language, there are concepts in other languages that don't exist in English. You know, in blue, the famous, this is the easy one, the easy target. Blue in English is blue. It's blue, light blue or blue. So it's the same color, light blue or blue. But in Russian, light blue and blue are two different words. So light blue is not blue. It's something else entirely. So cognitively, that is a different reality. If you're able to have some foreign concepts because you master the language beyond just the lingua franca, that is English, then your world is so much bigger. And I think that's why it's so important to expose your kids to more languages. I was watching Heather and Brett Weinstein, something like that, on the Dark Horse blog podcast past. And they felt like they had failed their children because they didn't teach them a second language, and they felt that it was important, but they couldn't put their finger. These are fucking smart people too. They couldn't put their finger on why it was important. So I'm here to tell you, as a dummy in the shop, it's important because if you don't have a label for something, it doesn't fucking exist. Yeah? If you're looking for a tool and you don't know the name of the tool, it doesn't exist, so you can't use it. You know, if you need a valve spring compressor and you don't know it exists because you don't know a valve spring compressor in your vocabulary, you're going to be friggin' and fucking with that head till she's got a bent valve and the head's fucked. You see what I'm saying? Language is the basis of our reality. And it's interesting, actually, that Brett, now thinking about it, wouldn't have realized this because he is an evolutionary biologist. However, highly educated people tend to be filtered out for either compliance or their ability to defer gratification. You know, you're putting up with the bullshit of the Universitad in order to delay your gratification so that you can eventually get tenure and then you don't need to fucking worry about it. But this soft few pounds of fatty tissue we got rolling around in our craniums, how come an elephant isn't as smart as us and they got more of the stuff? Why is that? Because they don't have the language. Their vocabulary might be 100 things. They don't have the language to be able to think. I don't think that potassium chloride worked worth the shit. Speaking of undergrad electives, one of my favorite classes, well, my favorite class ever was, I think it was the second year elective, and it was the evolution of technology, wherein we have been led to believe that there's a quantum leap in technology, that there's these great eureka moments that lead to the next revolution, the next big thing. And this class showed that the evolution of technology really lies in being able to recombinate existing technologies in novel ways. And what aids that is being aware, is having a very broad technical vocabulary, or a very broad vocabulary in general. We see the case in point here, the case which proves the point of Claude Shannon taking a philosophy class and turning that into something that has shaped the modern world. Computers. Without Claude Shannon having sat in on that philosophy class, and very likely he only took it because maybe he knew some Latin from his mother being a language teacher. I ought to give that a poke, yeah. Kind of a blob of clinker. Oh, now that is interesting. Some copper in there. Some cobalt. Something whose salt burns blue. I'll leave you to it, boys. Baby doll's got a hot date. Fucking too busy gabbing to drink any beer.